Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk with Danny Nierenberg. This is the third and final in a series we're doing about the really wonderful and cool youth champions who are part of the Act for Food and Act for Change campaign. The campaign gives youth a platform to discuss issues within the food system and actions they want both policymakers and business to take to create better food and agriculture systems to end hunger and environmental degradation. Today, I get to chat with Ryan Qasim, the West Asia Regional Director for Youth for Nature. He is one of the national coordinators for the Global Youth Biodiversity Network in Lebanon, a youth council member at Real Food Systems, the regional youth focal point for the Middle East and North Africa in support of the UN Food Systems Summit, and a member on the Youth Pledge for the UN Food Systems Summit. He's doing incredible work with so many great organizations and youth around the world. He holds a double master's degree in environmental sciences. He has previously worked with the United Nations Development Program, Greenpeace, and a greenhouse gas emission accounting firm in Denmark. So Ryan, it's so great to have you here. We're so thrilled about the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I know it's always a long, it's a long introduction to say all of these things that I'm part of, but I'm really grateful to be part of them. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and I didn't even list all of them. You're doing work with the UN Environment Program. You're doing all of these other things. And it's amazing how many folks in the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign are doing, the campaign in addition to all of the other work. And I'm wondering why, you decided to be part of that campaign and what it means to you.
True. So there are a lot of campaigns being developed for food systems in general, but the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign is a unified campaign, and it's different from all the others. So it sparked from youth who are actually who were convening dialogues for the Food Systems Summit, but then they decided to all come together and have one unified campaign so that we could have political, political aid from everybody else. So The idea is that we're all working on different components of food systems, and we all represent different solutions and different challenges within our regions. But we brought it all together under one campaign so that we have, political action, so that when we go to this summit, we can say, hey, we have 1 million people backing up everything youth have been doing. And so this is why we're demanding urgent and bold actions.
Absolutely. I think those unified voices that you're referring to is so important. And you mentioned another word that I've heard from all of your colleagues, the urgency of acting on these issues. Do you want to talk a little bit about that urgency?
So when it comes to urgency, we were really vocal in the pre-summit to express urgency and bold actions needed, because we all know, and I'm sure my other colleagues explained this to you, but the food systems contribute, a substantial share from greenhouse gas emissions and violations against human rights, and our nutrition isn't really well, on a worldwide perspective. So we're trying to change that really fast, but there are urgent messages we're trying to deliver in certain components of food systems. But that doesn't mean that we're calling for urgency in everything. So we're not trying to stress out the system, but there are some places, especially when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and the loss of biodiversity, that is where we need urgent action.
Absolutely. And what kind of bold actions should we be taking right now?
So, all right. So what we demanded from member states were three things in general in our closing speech at the pre-summit. We were demanding to develop policy incentives to restrict unhealthy food marketing. We were also asking to eliminate barriers such as finance, land, and information that are preventing youth from meaningfully engaging in different components of food systems. And our third demand was calling for intergenerational co-leadership of the development of member states' revised nationally determined contributions that must include food systems. those are the three things that we urgently are asking decision makers to take action on.
Amazing. Those are really bold actions for sure. Can we talk a little bit about each one? So why did you decide on number one to eliminate the unhealthy marketing practices for foods that are not nutrient dense, that are full of preservatives and trans fats, that are ultra processed?
Sure. So we're seeing a lot of cases about unhealthy individuals. Our unhealthy eating habits are contributing to premature deaths. They're contributing to the obesity epidemic and a lot of other things. And so what we're trying to say is that one way to tackle that is to restrict unhealthy food marketing. We're seeing the prices of unhealthy foods being lower than the prices of healthy foods. And this is something that is unacceptable. And we're also seeing that this is a worse case when it comes to countries or that are developing countries, because in those cases, when there's poverty, of course, the first thing people would think about is the cheaper food item. And so when unhealthy food is cheaper, they'll definitely resort to unhealthy food. And that on the long term might lead to, health issues as well. So that's why we're trying to focus on incentives, policy incentives, to restrict unhealthy food marketing.
So policy incentives like soda taxes, what are you looking for there?
Taxes, labeling, awareness campaigns, having a mandatory healthy meal at school and at universities every single day for everybody equally, and other sorts of policies.
I'm glad you mentioned universities there. I think when folks think of hunger, that they forget that a lot of university and college students are experiencing hunger, while they're trying to get an education, as youth. It's not just young children who are facing hunger.
True. So when we talk about hunger, usually what people think is that people are malnourished or are malnourished or are undernourished, but we're also talking about obesity, people being overweight, people eating empty calories, as they name them. So this is also something we're trying to incorporate.
That's great. That's such a great connection to have. Let's talk about number two that you mentioned in your demands at the end of the pre-summit, eliminating barriers for youth. What do those include?
So first and foremost is finance. There's a lot of youth-led campaigns, such as the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign, and a lot of other youth organizations around the world that are trying to, to take action on food systems, to advocate and raise awareness among their communities, but they're not funded. It's all voluntary, work. And so what we're trying to say is that if we are actually calling for co-leadership in all of these actions, we also need to be funded as well, because we can be doing all that work for free. It's very simple.
Absolutely.
That is one thing. Another thing is land. So when it comes to farmers or indigenous peoples, they need access to land that they cannot afford. And all of these new like entrepreneur projects that are being developed, they also need land, which is very expensive. And last is information. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of lack of access to information in some areas of the world, which is preventing global youth from joining the movement. So we need access to all three of these.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought up that youth face obstacles, including access to land and education and information. These are all things that are really important, whether you're living in Northern Africa or Asia or even the United States.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm trying to focus on is on a regional perspective, always from the Middle East and North Africa, because this is how I'm incorporated in the Food Systems Summit. And so there is it is very evident. You can see that there is a lack of finance, lack of land, and lack of information, especially in a region like this and in other regions around the world as well.
What are some of the biggest challenges for youth in the Middle East and Northern Africa right now?
So I can call upon a lot of challenges, but I'll definitely call upon challenges that you didn't hear in the pre-summit. That is 100% sure. and challenges that you don't really hear in global dialogues about food systems. So let's just give a very simple example. Did you hear any time someone talking about smuggling? No one talks about smuggling, but sometimes smuggling is a big issue for food security. You lose 10 to 20% of the food security you have in your country because of smuggling. No one talked about the influx of millions of refugees all of a sudden on the food security in that country. How are you supposed to feed 5 million people plus 3 additional million people?
Right.
That's the second thing. A third thing is conflict, war. And so in the Middle East, this is very, this is very, very prominent. You can see it in a lot of countries where there's war, and that is leading to food security. And what is happening is that a lot of organizations, especially the United Nations, what it's doing is what we call band-aid solutions. So they have the political ability to prevent, or not to prevent, but to stop these wars. But instead, what they do is that they send, boxes of food filled with sugar, oils, bread, sort of to sustain life, to survive. This is good on a very short-term period, but on a long-term period, when we're talking about something over 5 years, no, this is no longer a solution. We need to stop the wars that are happening. So these are some things. One last thing that you usually don't hear is economic sanctions. When one country wants to, fight with another country, they're taxing the import of certain food items that they export into that country. So if one country pays $10 for this item to import it, now it's paying $20, whereas all the other countries are paying $10 to import it, because they're playing that, filthy game of playing with people's, livelihood. Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really interested in and glad that you brought up conflict and refugees, because those are two areas where the climate crisis will have a big impact. The climate crisis is likely to increase conflict. That will mean more refugees fleeing. There will be environmental refugees who are, escaping the effects of climate change.
Exactly. So that is very evident in my area. So in Syria, you have a lot of climate refugees now. In Lebanon, you have economic refugees. But no matter what kind of refugee you are, whether political refugees, an environmental refugee, or other types of refugees, they're all affecting the food system. And, the food system is being affected by them because sometimes when, a country cuts off water on another country, that affects food production, and then everybody else needs to leave that area so that they can eat somewhere else. It's very simple. You can see it on television, but no one's talking about it because they think it's a very local issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So going back to the demands that you and your colleagues made at the UN Food System Pre-Summit, you talked about something, and I'm so interested in this, the need for intergenerational co-leadership, because we don't see that right now. We don't see young people in positions of power within the United Nations or other institutions that are making decisions that will affect, not just today and tomorrow, but future generations.
Exactly. So although the pre-summit showed a lot of youth involvement and a lot of space for youth to express their commitments and their demands, but we're still asking not to be presenters in such events, not to take part, not to help in advocating and raising awareness, but to actually make decisions. Yes, we might not be experts on everything, but this, we're coming from a position that this is our future, that we're here to determine with you. So we might not be the experts when it comes to creating policies, but we're there so we can push you on the table to take those urgent and bold actions. That's why we want to be on the table. So we're not going to participate as experts in the field. We could do that, but we're there because we want to ensure that you're taking immediate actions. This is why we want to be on the table.
Agreed. And again, it's really the urgency of these issues. We don't have a minute to wait. We should have been acting. Older generations like mine should have been acting way more powerfully over the last 40 years to prevent some of what we're seeing, whether it's the food security crisis or the biodiversity crisis or the climate crisis or any other crisis that's out there. So it's really great from at least my perspective to have youth in these meetings, really at the table, as you said. And why do you think there has been, I've heard from some other folks who've been involved in the UN Food System Summit that there's resistance to really listening to youth?
I'm not so sure why that is, but from my own perspective and from what I see, I think they're still unsure what to do with youth or how to view youth in certain events such as these. So when it comes to decision making, how should we look at youth? Are you the scientific experts? Are you the farmers? Are you the business owners? Who are you? Okay, you are youth. You're from 18 to 35, but they're a bit confused at how to deal with us. And sometimes the thing is, when you're going outside globally to all youth around the world and asking them for their demands or their challenges, sometimes they're presenting very specific local challenges that decision makers can't really help with. And so you have that sort of confusion as to what exactly do you want, how can you help.
What do you hope comes out of the UN Food System Summit that will take place in September for youth specifically?
So two things that we thought about as youth after the pre-summit. Number one is that we're demanding commitments or accountability on the commitments that will be taken. We don't want the Food System Summit to end up like the COPE events that happen every year. We don't want them to be voluntary. We want them to be, not a dictatorship, but we want accountability on those commitments. We want to make sure that if you don't take those commitments, something should happen. Some accountability should happen. Number two is that we want during the actual summit that, discussions are focused on local and regional challenges as well, such as the ones I named for you like a few minutes ago, because those weren't discussed because they didn't have this space. There's a focus on action tracks, but not on regional perspectives. So these are, the two main things we're asking for.
That's really interesting. I think those regional perspectives and those local perspectives are so important. So it's surprising to me that, after all this time and, you're right, after so many discussions around the climate crisis, after so many, events around food systems, that they're not looking at a regional and local perspective.
Yeah. And like there's one additional thing is how can we make this equitable for everybody? So certain countries have the ability to take action and to transform their food systems. Even in developing countries, some of them do and some of them don't. But how do we ensure those countries who can't take commitments but want to get a share of the solutions? How can we do that? Is it through a shared global fund? Is it through other means? Is it through sharing technology? We don't know, but this is what we're asking for.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you talked about accountability. I think that's been a major problem, again, with all of these meetings and conferences that all of us go to. But along with that, you need a lot of transparency around decision making, don't you think?
This is exactly why we were there. So more than talking about specific food systems issues, we are there as youth to represent that decision-making gap between us and decision makers. That is what we're focusing on in every event we go to, whether it's the Food System Summit or other event. There's a gap in decision-making that we want to fill. We want to be on the seat with them before we start talking about our regional, challenges and the solutions we're presenting.
So that decision-making gap is because, for lots of reasons, right? Youth aren't respected as much as they should be. So-called experts might not think that you have enough knowledge at this point to take part in these discussions. I'm wondering how you and your colleagues are working to overcome those stereotypes about youth.
Exactly. So those stereotypes, I think, are the biggest barrier for us to engage meaningfully. So what we're trying to show is showing youth leadership and stewardship through the work that we're trying to do. We're showing them that we are able to create social changes. We're able to advocate very strongly. We're able to raise awareness among tens of thousands of people around the world on scientifically backed policies that we want. So we aren't creating challengers or solutions that we randomly wrote on a paper. No, we are resorting to science that they produce. We are criticizing policies that they produce. So we aren't creating something on our own. No, we're trying to be involved. So the more they help us instead of resenting us, the more things we can achieve together.
Absolutely. And that science-based approach and the awareness building are key to all of this. Ryan, I want to give you a chance to talk about your other work, including Youth for Nature. Can you let our listeners know what you're doing with that project?
So at Youth for Nature, which is a youth-led, climate-focused, non-governmental organization based in Canada, we focus on nature-based solutions. This is what we focus on, advocating for nature-based solutions and calling out greenwashing within the COPE events on nature-based solutions. We also focus on climate justice and indigenous rights to nature. And my role there is to apply all of this in West Asia and the region where I am from. So we talk about how militarization affects climate justice movements. We talk about what is a just energy transition according to Arab youth. We also talk about local nature-based solutions initiatives that are being taken here. And so we are trying to highlight what youth in this region, and of course globally, but my role is in this region. Through our storytelling program, we allow them to apply stories, to send their stories, and their calls to action. So it's exactly like the same field, but on another topic.
That is wonderful. That's really a great initiative. You mentioned nature-based solutions, and I'm wondering, for a lot of folks, that means a lot of different things. Specifically for Youth for Nature, what are you looking at?
So, okay, the problem with nature-based solutions these days is that the momentum picked up in 2019, but then what we call is bad faith, companies or whatever, defining nature-based solutions on their own terms. And so we're trying to call that out. We're trying to develop our own positioning on what are nature-based solutions. So to us, they should meet three criteria. Number one is the climate and biodiversity targets. Number two is people's livelihoods. And third, so it's biodiversity, it's climate, and it's people's livelihoods. It should meet these three criteria for it to be defined as nature-based solutions. And again, this isn't our perspective as youth. This is the definition by the IUCN, not us.
Absolutely. Well, those are really, I think you're encompassing a lot there in making sure that those nature-based solutions are rooted in not only science and protecting biodiversity and battling the climate crisis, but also making sure that people's livelihoods are met. I think that often gets lost in these conversations.
Especially that of indigenous people, I would say, because they live in those lands where nature-based solutions are taking part of.
Can you talk a little bit more about that indigenous perspective? You're right, that often, is lost when we're talking about all of these issues, that they rely more on natural resources and the environment than many others.
Exactly. And so the thing is, these companies are trying to offset their carbon emissions. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to plant monoculture trees in areas that they buy from indigenous people. And so those ecosystems that they're trying to create don't have the services that indigenous people rely on. And so what we're saying is that those lands should be controlled by indigenous people. They should decide what happens to them and how they're controlled. Even if you create a very biodiverse ecosystem, but you prevent indigenous people from accessing that land, that is also now not considered as nature-based solutions because you're preventing indigenous people from accessing lands that they own. And I can give examples here in West Asia with the Bedouin communities. And so these communities used to go from Saudi Arabia all the way to here in Lebanon. And so when we created countries and we created private land ownership and natural reserves and all of those things, they can't move freely the way they used to. And so that creates conflict as well.
And that goes back to this idea of climate justice that you're working on. We really need justice for indigenous peoples and others who again rely so heavily on natural resources.
Exactly. And so we're trying to put them at the forefront of these discussions, not forgetting them, not allowing decision makers to marginalize them because of the current system we have as a government, as a country, because some of those indigenous peoples, they don't operate in the same system that we, citizens of a government operate in. And so we're trying to be flexible to incorporate those differences.
And the storytelling aspect of your work, that really helps create awareness, I imagine.
We're trying to show a personal touch to a story. So you put a personal touch, you put a very local problem that you want to discuss with an urgency for decision makers to take action. And so because this is very compelling when you go out into the public audience or with the public audience to highlight what youth want. You're not only trying to tell them, yeah, okay, youth are all experts. No, but they have a personal connection to the land, to the water, to the natural resources where they live. And, this is how the climate crisis is affecting them. And this is what they're demanding. Through this kind of story, this is how we're trying to compel people to listen to youth.
I love that idea of really putting a human face to these issues. Where can folks find more information about the Youth for Nature program?
So they could go to our website, www.youth4nature, and 4 as a number.org, and they can find all the work that we do, the events. There's a storytelling map where they can zoom in on every country and find the storyteller there, get their contacts, read their stories, even look at regions where we work as well. So they can find it all there, or they could go to any social media platform and look for us there at Youth for Nature.
Great. Youth for Nature. That's the number 4.org. And where can folks find more about the Act for Food and Act for Change campaign?
So folks can pledge at actionsforchange.org.
Great.
That is where they can vote on the 5 top actions they want to change within food systems, but they can also pledge at actionsforfood.org. It literally takes them 5 seconds to pledge. We have now over 10,126 pledges made worldwide.
Wow.
This is great. We're picking up political momentum here. So the more people help us with this, the more we could send those actions they want.
That is amazing. Congratulations. So again, actionsforchange.org. And again, that's the number 4, and then actionsforfood.org. Okay, so Ryan, final question. If you were in front of the United Nations Secretary General right now, what would you like to tell him?
So it is exactly what I tried to say at the pre-summit. On a personal level, I would say, please don't forget regions. There are many challenges within regions that need to be discussed when it comes to food systems. But I also tell him, don't put food systems in silos. You control the entire United Nations when it comes to peace, conflict, food, economics, all of that. You have access to worldwide funding, and the United Nations is not an underfunded organization. We all know that. You have all that political power in your hands to be able to change things. And you can literally put pressure on decision makers and member states to commit. And so please do use that power you have.
Amazing. What a wonderful way to end this podcast, Ryan. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for all of the work you're doing, and keep up the good work. I hope to see you at the UN Food Systems Summit or somewhere along the way. But thank you again.
Thank you very much for hosting me.
If you aren't already a Food Tank member, you can be part of making conversations like today's possible and attend the incredible amount of post-pandemic events Food Tank is planning absolutely free. Learn more about membership at foodtank.com/join.